So I'm narrowing it down to these three, that God really said. He really said it. God really does speak. And the snake really does lie. There are some voices to listen to and some voices to not listen to. And the snake can speak 90% truth and still be causing you to do wrong. And God really saves. Even when he's said it and then things have gone wrong, God still finds a way to put it right, which is wonderful. But that way of putting it right is not without consequences in the middle. It's not an immediate. It's a hope for the future, in this case. So there's a fall and there's a hope. God really said. And then the snake comes along and says, and the snake we read in as Satan, and Christians have for a very long time read in that this is not just an ordinary snake. So when the snake starts speaking and they're not surprised, we read in that that's Satan speaking through a snake. We read it in as the old snake, the Satan figure. So God really said, and the snake comes along and says, did God really say? What did God say exactly? Did God mean it? And he starts assailing the woman. And here's the thing, Eve didn't know properly what God had said. That's part of the problem. Eve gives an answer that is nearly what God said. But if we go back in the story, in Genesis 2, we see that God commanded Adam about the tree. And God said it more directly to Adam. Eve's here, and we don't know what Eve's heard exactly about what God said. There seems to have been some responsibility on Adam to teach Eve what to know about what God has said. We don't know what God has said directly to Eve, but we know what Eve's heard somewhat. Eve didn't properly know. She said, we can't even touch the tree. Now that's probably quite wise. If you think something's going to kill you, well, I better not go near it. Mo told a story from an illustration once about a driver that was to be hired. And it's quite a famous illustration of someone was going to hire their chauffeur. And they said, how close can you get me to the edge of the cliff? And there were these three drivers, and one said, I can get you within an inch of the edge of the cliff, and you'll be completely safe, and we'll get to our destination. The next one said, I can get you within a hair. I can get you so close, I'm such a good driver. I can get you within a hair's breadth of the edge of the cliff. The third one said, I wouldn't take you anywhere near the cliff. I'm your driver, I'm to keep you safe. And so it seems to me like Adam said, just to be safe, don't go near that tree. You know the one in the middle of the garden? Don't go anywhere near it, don't touch it, because God says we'll die. And he's given a kind of garbled explanation. He didn't say exactly what God said. And the Jews in Jesus' day seem to have done that somewhat. They seem to have gone, well, God said don't do this, so we also won't do this. And that way we don't go anywhere near it. We don't touch it. Which is often good advice, apart from when you don't know which one's which. Because if God didn't say it, there might be sometimes when you go and you touch it, and it's still all right. If she'd only touched the fruit, it would actually have been all right. But if she touches the fruit, and then she goes, but God said I'd die if I only touched it, and I've touched it and I still live, then she's encouraged to go further and eat it because she hasn't died yet, right? Sometimes we go and explore something that's wrong for us. And when we get a bit closer, if we think even getting close to the wrong is going to harm us, then we might be encouraged to do the wrong if we find that getting close to it didn't harm us. So it's important to know exactly what God said and what he didn't say, right? It is good wisdom, usually, not to even get close to it. But Jesus hung out with sinners and tax collectors. Jesus hung out closely with people that the Jews were saying, if you even get close to them, then that's an obvious sign of sin. No. Sometimes there's a time. Sometimes there's a time to hang out with people who aren't doing it all right in order to rescue. And Eve didn't exactly know what God had said. And she took what might have been good wisdom in other situations and misapplied it, it seems. It says in 1 Timothy 2:14 that Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived. And the word for deceived there, I thought it was interesting. It takes its root from the word to be inattentive. Right? She was deceived because she wasn't completely aware She wasn't completely clued in to what she was meant to be doing. She wasn't 100% attentive as well to exactly what God had said. But Eve is not cast in the Bible as the prime sinner, actually, in the New Testament. Right? Because it's easy to see a verse like that and think, well, Eve's going to get it entirely in the neck. There's a sense in which Eve didn't do it with quite so open eyes as Adam, who has had the communication directly. Did God really say? Adam's not innocent in this. Adam, it seems like, is right there with Eve and doesn't speak up and doesn't act. It doesn't say exactly that Adam's right there with Eve, but given that when Eve takes the fruit and gives them to Adam, a lot of people read it as Adam and Eve were there together and he wasn't saying anything. He wasn't speaking up. He wasn't doing what he was meant to do. And Romans 5 seems to cast him as the problem. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned. So we see that Adam also took the fruit from Eve in that case, and he ate. And in this way, all of us are guilty. And it's not just because of what Adam and Eve did, but it's rare that you meet someone who will say, I've never sinned once in my life. They might reject the language of sin, but if you press them on it, have you ever done wrong? They might reject that they've offended God, right? That happens more often. But the idea of, is there anything that even by your own standards you haven't lived up to? Yeah, there are. It'd take quite a liar to say there weren't. So we know that in Adam and Eve, all have sinned. And we know that partly by the way we respond now. The good news is that Jesus had better responses. Jesus responded better to the serpent. We saw him being tempted 3 times. And 3 times he said, no, no, no. And he did it throughout his life. It says that Satan went away until an opportune time, right? Satan would have kept tempting Jesus in ways that aren't so clearly written down. And Jesus says, no, no, no. Categorically no, Satan. No, snake. No, deceiver. Jesus has better responses to the snake. Do we? Do we have better responses than Eve had? Do we know what God said and then trust it? Because the snake really lies. And the reason we're interested in this story is that it's not just a story about the past, it's a story about the present. We still behave like Adam and Eve behaved. We still have the snake that on earth is causing chaos. And he does it principally through lying. He's mostly a deceiver. The snake really lies. Tim Keller, I think he was drawing on an old Puritan, but I couldn't find the reference. Tim Keller says, Satan doesn't control us with fang marks on the flesh, but with lies in the heart. I wanted to find the source of that, but I couldn't quite, but Tim Keller says it. Satan doesn't control us with fang marks on the flesh, but with lies in the heart. That's his main weapon. Our best defense in the fight against his lies is not the production of incantations, but the rehearsal of truth, to know what God says and to say it back. And so when we get a temptation and says, well, why don't you do this? We say, well, God says this. And I know that's true. And so we have a defense against the lies of Satan, which still exists today and are still spoken into people's hearts. There was once a quiz that annoyed me greatly, that I was present at with my children. And for one of the questions, the person had asked the question, when was the moon landing? I thought, I know this. I was happy. But then when it came to the answers on the quiz, the person was happy to say, I don't believe there was a moon landing, so everyone gets a point. That annoyed me. That annoyed me greatly. That's not the rules of a quiz. No. But it annoys me greatly on 2 grounds. Not only, 3, it's not the rules of the quiz, 1, right? But also, not only is there evidence of the moon landing in the past, they filmed it, which some people go, it's garbage. But that's rubbish. Some people reject that as evidence. But the thing is, there's proof of the moon landing now. If people point telescopes onto the moon now, you can see where it happened. There's a flagpole. Right? So not only is there evidence in the past, there's evidence now. The thing about the fall with Adam and Eve, it's not just that there's evidence in the past that it's written down for us. There's evidence now in each of our hearts. We know we don't live up to expectations. We know there's ways in which we let people down, let God down. We know there's ways in which we're inattentive. We know there's ways in which we've listened to the lies of the enemy. We know it now. There's fallen people then, there's fallen people now. So that's the bad news. That's the fall, that we keep doing it. We're falling in Adam and Eve, but we're sinners now too. That's the bad news. But this is the hope. We've looked at the hope already and how strong Jesus is. But how does it apply to us? That's great for Jesus. How does it apply for us? The hope is that Jesus really saves. And we are included in the strength he has and in the rescue that he puts forward. There are still consequences. He says to the woman, I'll make your pains in childbearing very severe. And he talks about the relationship with her husband. Relationships have gone wrong because of this. If you don't give God the proper place, if we don't give God the proper place, if we don't listen to what he says and believe it and act on it, all the other relationships will be upset. Eve's relationship with her partner that she dearly loved, that was going to go out the window. Not completely, because I'm amazed that Adam and Eve don't divorce, and they're used as a reference by Jesus about not, right? They're used in that teaching, but the relationship's going to be upset. And for Adam, his work's going to be upset, right? All these things are going to be out of whack because of what you've done, they say. And sin still does that. Whenever we sin against one another and against God, there are consequences. Death was in there. But even these consequences have an element of mercy woven through. When God brings death and says we're not going to allow the man to reach out his hand and take from the tree of life, how many people have you spoken to who say, I wouldn't want to live forever, not like this? And they're right. They're right. Assisted dying bill is, I wouldn't want to live forever like this. And in that sense, they're right. Because God too says, I don't want them to live forever like this. Not like this. So I'm going to stop them from living forever. Why? Because sin has entered the world. So they're not going to be able to reach out their hand and reach and get the tree of life. No, not now. Not like this. But the end of the Bible, Revelation, the tree of life is there because they can live like that. They can live when all things are set right. But they can't live like this. So thank God we don't live forever in these bodies that decay in this sin-filled world. Thank God he's not fixing that forever. Well, he is. He's fixing it forever. But he's not keeping it fixed in that state forever. So God shows mercy. And this is the way in which he does it. This is the hope and the promise, or at least part of it. The Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, the personal God who's also in charge of all, said to the serpent, he doesn't let the serpent speak. He talks to the man and woman. He does not let the serpent speak again. He knows enough about the serpent. He says to the serpent, because you have done this, he doesn't need any evidence. You've done it, Satan. Cursed are you. You'll crawl on your belly, you'll eat the dust. Also this, I'll put enmity between you and the woman and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. That's seen as a promise of Jesus. That's seen as a promise of the Messiah. Notice this, that we've seen the fall, that through the woman and then through the man, the snake had caused rebellion against God, right? We see this promise of God, that through the woman, giving birth to a child, and then through that man, the snake will be crushed. Things will be put right. We see that on Golgotha, the skull hill, Jesus was crucified. In that, he was taking the punishment, the pain, the venom of Satan, in effect, on himself. The consequences of the sin of the man and the woman, of you and me, was taken on that hill, but also the victory against the devil was won. That the snake was crushed. Because it is through lies and guilt that he had his power of death. And Jesus took the consequences of that. He took the curses. It says in 2 Corinthians 5:21, for our sake, he made him, Jesus. God made Jesus to be sin, who knew no sin. It's really strong language, isn't it? Made Jesus be sin. Be sin. Ugh. It's a horror to witness the cross. He made him to be sin, who knew no sin. It wasn't that he'd done it. So that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That's the great trade. There was a knowledge of good and evil that was expressed in the garden. Do we think that God knew evil? They were told to become like God in this knowledge of good and evil. Well, how could God know evil in the sense of experience? Because know is used in the sense of experience. Did God know evil? Well, he knew the pain of Satan rejecting him. He was Lucifer, the light bearer. God knew what it was to witness darkness and experience darkness. But in him, there's no darkness at all. So it wasn't because God within himself is a person who knows evil in the sense of experience. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit had not been doing evil to one another before there was a world and before there was a heaven. But Satan had fallen and he'd introduced a darkness experience. And when Adam and Eve took from that tree, when they also experienced good and evil, when they sinned against God, Jesus was later to say, I will experience that evil. I will take it on myself. In that sense, Jesus will know evil, but it says he knew no sin. He didn't do it himself, but rather he would experience our evil for our sake. Or the consequences of that, at any rate. So Adam and Eve, they grasped for godlike power, and we too grasp. But Jesus, trusting God, grasped for humanity in the sense that he was rescuing them. He wasn't grasping, holding on to godhood. Instead, he was grasping at us, for us. And he takes the punishment of death in a crown of thorns, a symbol of curse, and he overcame. So there's the fall and the hope that God really said, there's going to be consequences, there's going to be death. He really said, and they really should have trusted him. And the snake really lied, and really does continue to lie. We need to hold on to what's true. And God really saves. It's not just fall. There's death and there's resurrection. There's fall and there's standing up again. Jesus stands up again, and we must stand up with him. Let's sing a song. This is a song that's largely